The Dominion fleet carved through the darkness of space like a blade dipped in arrogance. Admiral Croswell stood at the forward observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette lit only by the glow of distant stars. He was not a man prone to excitement. Conquest had long ago grown stale. To him, this raid was another entry in the endless ledger of the Zeroth Dominion, resources tallied, populations culled, another weakling species folded into submission. Below, on the main display, a minor frontier colony burned. Croswell watched without interest as the plasma strikes lanced downward, vaporizing defenses that might as well have been toys. The colony's meager fleet had been swept aside within minutes. Now the survivors scrambled on the ground, sending frantic transmissions that no one would hear. "Efficient," muttered Commander Sarash's aide, stepping up beside him. "Another clean victory." Croswell exhaled through his nostrils. Victory implies a contest. This is slaughter. Predictable, dull slaughter. His voice carried the weight of routine. He had overseen campaigns across 3 sectors, had crushed rebellions and broken civilizations, yet each time he felt less. Victory had lost its flavor long ago. The bridge crew chuckled at his disdain, but one junior officer cleared his throat with hesitation. Admiral, intelligence flagged a human colony on the manifest. Perhaps a target. Croswell's eyes flicked toward him. Humans. The little planet-bound creatures who cling to neutrality treaties like a drowning man to driftwood? Leave them. They're not worth our attention. Yet their worlds are rich in resources, the officer pressed. Resources are everywhere, Croswell said, turning back to the viewport. But provoking Earth invites bureaucracy. They prefer to stay quiet. Let them. His tone was final, but there was a smirk in his words, as if mocking even the suggestion. Humans were an afterthought, a primitive species who had avoided true war for centuries. Hours later, in the War Council chamber aboard the flagship, the Dominion officers gathered. A holographic map flickered to life, displaying sectors ripe for conquest. Croswell lounged in his chair, only half listening, as Sarash detailed logistical chains and fuel routes. His mind wandered. Every battle felt the same, an enemy convinced of its importance, crushed in minutes. Where was the challenge? Where was the glory he had once craved? It was then another officer spoke. "Admiral, consider this. A human research station sits just outside our newly marked expansion line. Strategically isolated. Lightly defended." Croswell straightened with a faint spark of interest. A research station. Yes. Hardly worth notice, but symbolic. A strike there would show we claim territory without fear of treaties. And humans, the officer sneered, are unlikely to retaliate. The council murmured in agreement. Humans were weak. Everyone knew this. Their colonies remained neutral, even when their neighbors burned. They had avoided open war for generations, relying on diplomacy and empty words. Croswell leaned forward, a glimmer of amusement in his cold eyes. Then why not? Perhaps it will remind them that peace is a fragile illusion. Within days, the Dominion fleet dropped out of warp above the human station. The outpost was unremarkable, a cluster of modules orbiting a barren moon, a few transport vessels, some token defense satellites. Croswell almost yawned at the sight. "Proceed," he ordered. The first volley cut through the satellites, leaving them drifting husks. Another barrage tore open the station's hull, spilling metal and bodies into the void. Alarms rang across the Dominion bridge, not in warning, but as confirmation of success. The enemy had not fired back. No distress calls were detected beyond a brief, encrypted burst that vanished into static. "Pathetic," Sarash said with a laugh. "They don't even scream properly." Croswell smiled thinly. Yet something in the silence unsettled him. Most prey begged, pleaded, resisted even when hope was gone. But this absence of noise, felt strange. "Launch ground teams," he said. "I want the wreckage secured. Bring me whatever they were working on. If humans dabble in technology, it might amuse us." Dropships descended toward the moon's surface, carrying squads of Dominion soldiers. Croswell returned to the viewport, watching the slow arcs of fire as they pierced the thin atmosphere. He expected panic. He expected at least the illusion of resistance. What he received instead was nothing. Reports came in minutes later, confusion clear in every voice. "Admiral, the facility is empty. Abandoned. Decoys, perhaps." "Impossible," Sarash snapped. "Sensors detected life signs. Shadows, Commander. Hollow structures. Dummy reactors. Even the power grid is a shell. Krosel frowned, the first real crack in his mask of boredom. Decoys? Entirely fabricated colonies were rare or wasteful. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had left mannequins at workstations, fabricated heat signatures, even automated broadcasts that mimicked chatter. But the place was hollow, built to be discovered. Perhaps they fled, Sarash suggested. Krosel shook his head slowly. Fled before knowing they were in danger? No. This, he trailed off, studying the debris with narrowed eyes. This feels prepared. The silence from Earth continued. No declaration of war, no diplomatic protests, not even a whispered threat. Just stillness, as if the humans were holding their breath. Admiral, the officer from earlier asked nervously, do we press forward? There's no resistance. Krosel looked at him, then back to the dark planet looming below. A strange chill ran down his spine, though he refused to name it fear. Yes, he said at last. We press forward. Humans will learn that silence does not protect them. He tried to sound confident, but even he could not ignore the unease creeping into his thoughts. Something about this felt wrong, though he would never admit aloud. The fleet prepared to descend, weapons charged, troops ready. To them, this was conquest as usual. To Krosel, it was something he could not yet define, an edge he felt but could not see. As the first transports broke through orbit, the Admiral caught his reflection in the viewport. For the briefest second, he wondered if this time might be different. Then he dismissed the thought. Humans were weak. They had always been weak. And yet, the silence lingered. The Dominion soldiers expected a swift plunder, but the moon's surface betrayed nothing except the hollow echo of their boots against empty steel. They searched chambers that looked lived and yet were strangely sterile, tables set for meals that no one had eaten, half-written reports scattered across desks, children's toys neatly arranged as though waiting for small hands that never came. Every detail was convincing at a glance, but the closer one looked, the more it dissolved into artifice. The air recyclers ran without wear, data terminals blinked in endless loops, and the bodies recovered near the wreckage were mannequins filled with heat packs to mimic life. When the reports filtered up to Admiral Krosel, his lips curled into a humorless grin. An elaborate masquerade, he muttered. The humans amused themselves. His officers tried to laugh, but the unease was spreading like a sickness. Soldiers prided themselves on courage in the face of open battle. Deception was harder to dismiss. Perhaps it was a last-ditch effort to trick us, Sarash said, though his voice carried little conviction. Or, Krosel countered softly, it was meant to be found. He returned to the command deck, staring at the silent planet below. Sensors detected no significant population centers, but the readings were erratic, as though they skimmed the surface of something hidden deeper. Human silence stretched out into a void that swallowed every attempt to interpret. He felt as though the very quiet pressed against the hull, smothering sound, watching. The Dominion fleet advanced cautiously. Scouts swept into orbit, mapping structures that appeared residential but were eerily uniform, identical rows of towers where not a single window showed movement. From a distance they looked like cities. Up close they were stage sets, facades held together by scaffolding. The Dominion was not tearing down a civilization. They were dismantling a performance. Krosel summoned the images to the main screen. His officers muttered, some scoffing, others whispering uneasily. One leaned forward and touched the edge of a hologram as if to prove it was real. Admiral, the officer said, why construct such illusions? What purpose? To mislead, Krosel said, though he kept his eyes fixed on the shifting projections. But not us. Not yet. These were not built to deter invasion, they were bait. The word lingered. No one spoke. Krosel turned sharply. Recall the ground teams. Withdraw the scouts. Reform the line. The bridge hummed with sudden urgency, but before the order could be executed, every console flickered. Dominion communication channels lit with bursts of static, then cleared to a single message, a human voice, calm, measured, utterly devoid of fear. You have trespassed on Earth. You have one chance to leave. You won't get another. The words echoed across the bridge, repeated in every language of the Dominion. The voice was not angry, not trembling, not desperate. It was clinical, as though the statement had been rehearsed long ago, waiting only for the trigger. Sarash hissed, they dare threaten us? But no one answered him. Even the officers who had mocked Earth days before sat in silence, struck by the clarity of the voice. Krosel felt a prickle crawl along his skin. He had heard countless warnings in his career, screams, curses, begging, but never this. The calmness chilled him more than defiance could. "Trace the source," he ordered. "We can't," replied a technician, panic edging into her tone. "The signal isn't coming from a single location. It's everywhere." Moments later, the Dominion fleet's systems stuttered. Navigation screens flickered with corrupted maps. Weapons calibration misaligned by fractions, just enough to breed doubt. Even the secure warnet, hardened by decades of conquest, filled with errors. Then the human voice returned, this time repeating the Dominion's own battle plans back to them word for word, ship formations, invasion routes, code phrases. Information they believed untouchable. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crew. "They shouldn't have access to this," Sarash growled. "It's impossible." But it was not impossible. It was happening. Croswell stood very still, his hands tightening behind his back until his claws bit into his palms. "So," he whispered, "they were never hiding. They were watching." On the outer perimeter of the fleet, a destroyer suddenly went dark. No explosion, no external attack. Its systems simply shut down, leaving it adrift. Another ship followed, and another. They blinked out like dying stars, stripped of power with surgical precision. Yet none were destroyed. Humanity did not unleash fire. They removed options, one by one, as if plucking pieces from a board game. "Admiral," cried a comms officer, "they could have killed us outright. Why haven't they?" The question hung in the recycled air. Croswell knew the answer, though he wished he didn't. It wasn't mercy. It was message. Humanity was demonstrating control, showing restraint not because they couldn't obliterate the Dominion, but because they chose not to. It was dominance carried in silence, in precision. Sarash tried to bark orders, his voice cracking. "Form attack wings. Prepare bombardment." "No," Croswell cut him off. His tone was sharp enough to slice through the panic. "Attack now, and you will not live long enough to regret it." His officers stared at him, wide-eyed. For the first time, Admiral Croswell, veteran of countless campaigns, admitted hesitation. It was not weakness, it was clarity. He understood now that this was no raid. It was the moment the Dominion had made its first miscalculation in centuries. The human voice ceased. The systems returned to normal. For a few seconds, the bridge felt as though it had been released from an invisible grip. But Croswell sensed the truth. The grip had not vanished. It had merely loosened, as though waiting for a reason to tighten again. He dismissed his officers with a curt order and remained alone at the viewport. The planet turned slowly below, serene, untouched. It mocked him with its stillness. In the solitude, he whispered, "You were never prey, were you? You were the hunters waiting in the tall grass." The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth, and yet a spark of awe burned in his chest. Humans had set the board, laid the trap, and invited the Dominion to step inside. He had laughed at them, dismissed them as primitive. Now he understood the silence was not cowardice. It was calculation. Still, he was Admiral Croswell, bound by pride, chained by the Dominion's hunger. He could not simply retreat. To withdraw now would invite ridicule, demotion, disgrace. His career, his life, his very identity rested on pressing forward. And yet, as the human silence stretched into eternity, he knew pressing forward meant stepping into a war unlike any the galaxy had seen. He turned away from the viewport at last, forcing steel into his voice. "Signal the Council," he said. "Inform them Earth is not as defenseless as it seems. And prepare contingency measures." Sarash hesitated. "Do we continue the operation, Admiral?" Croswell's gaze hardened. "Yes. But understand this. If we strike again, we are no longer hunters. We are quarry." The admission hung heavy in the air. Sarash bowed and departed, leaving Croswell alone with the stars. Somewhere on the surface below, he imagined, humans were waiting, quiet, patient, unblinking. And for the first time in decades, the Admiral felt not boredom, not superiority, but something sharper, colder. Admiral Croswell sat alone in his quarters, the shadows drawn long by the dim glow of his terminal. He replayed the human transmission again and again, as though repetition might dilute its effect. The voice remained calm, detached, a simple pronouncement of consequence. Each time it chilled him more deeply than the last. He had heard screams, curses, desperate vows of vengeance, but never a warning so measured. It was not the threat of the weak, but the statement of the prepared. To steady himself, he requested archives the Dominion had on humanity. The files were sparse, dismissive reports catalogued by intelligence agents over centuries. Yet buried within the dry assessments were glimpses of something else. He watched footage of human conflicts, recorded long before they reached the stars. Entire cities consumed in firestorms, fleets sinking beneath oceans, weapons of such scale they poisoned the air itself. He found himself leaning closer, captivated. The humans had waged wars upon themselves with a ferocity the Dominion rarely unleashed on others. They seemed almost addicted to struggle, their history a continuous chain of blood and ashes, rebuilding only to destroy again. Croswell rubbed at his eyes, uneasy. "You fought yourselves like this and survived," he muttered. The more he watched, the more he sensed something familiar, but far more ruthless. The Dominion fought for conquest, for resources, for Dominion itself. Humans fought as if existence were always at stake. No wonder their silence now felt suffocating. When the Council summoned him, he expected understanding. He expected fear. Instead, the chamber on the Capitol world roared with dismissive laughter. 1,000 lights glittered from above, illuminating tiers of officials draped in finery, their voices sharp with arrogance. "Admiral," intoned the High Chancellor, a withered creature whose jeweled robes weighed more than his body, "you come before us with tales of phantoms and shadow wars. Is this what shakes the great Croswell? A primitive species with toys and parlor tricks?" "They are not primitives," Croswell replied, his voice like iron scraping against stone. "What we encountered was not improvisation. It was design. They knew we would come. They led us into their theater, into their silence. And they showed restraint. Restraint is far more dangerous than rage." The chamber rippled with murmurs. Some mocked him, others leaned forward with uneasy interest. One counselor barked, "You dare suggest these humans are our equals?" Croswell's jaw tightened. "No, I suggest they are worse. Equals can be measured. This is something we cannot yet measure. They fight differently. They think differently. I watch them reach into our command net and recite our own orders back to us. Does that sound like weakness?" The Chancellor sneered. "And yet they did not destroy you. They toyed with you. That makes them arrogant children." "No," Croswell said, heat rising at last in his voice. "That makes them patient predators. They could have annihilated us, and did not. Ask yourself why. Perhaps they wait for us to reveal more. Perhaps they are testing how far we will go. But mark this, if we step further, we may not have the chance to retreat." A silence fell, heavier than the mockery had been. Some counselors exchanged uneasy looks, but the Chancellor struck the floor with his staff. "The Dominion does not cower. We expand. We take what we will. Humanity has hidden behind treaties long enough, pretending to be neutral. You will correct your failure, Admiral. You will erase Earth, and when their ashes drift through the void, no one will doubt Dominion's supremacy." The decree settled like a death sentence. Croswell bowed stiffly, though inside him something cracked. He knew the Chancellor's pride outweighed wisdom, but open defiance meant execution. He had seen it happen to others who dared speak truth against the will of the chamber. After the assembly, Sarash caught him in the corridor. "You fought them," the commander whispered. "Why risk your standing? The Council has no ears for fear." Croswell studied him, searching for the trace of doubt he hoped to see. "Because someone must remember what we saw. If the Dominion marches into Earth believing in weakness, we march into our own grave. I would rather face humiliation here than lead the fleet blind into annihilation." Sarash hesitated, then lowered his voice. "And yet you will obey." "I will obey," Croswell said, though his tone made the words sound like poison. "But not without preparing for the storm." Back aboard his flagship, Croswell convened only his most trusted captains. He showed them the footage of human wars, let them see the fire that consumed continents, the devastation wrought by weapons forged when humanity still crawled upon a single world. The captains watched in silence, their faces taut with unease. When the last image faded, one finally asked, "Admiral, what kind of species survives this?" Croswell answered without hesitation, "One that does not fear us." The words landed like a blade against stone. His captains shifted uneasily, but none contradicted him. He told them of the Council's orders, of the demand to erase Earth, and though their faces betrayed dread, not one dared openly question it. They were Dominion, bound by obedience, yet the seed of fear had been planted. Later, in the solitude of his chamber, Croswell wrestled with his thoughts. Pride demanded he crush the humans, prove the Dominion's supremacy. Reason told him to retreat, to beg the Council for sanity. Yet his heart, darkened by decades of war, whispered something else. that perhaps this was what he had sought all along. For years, conquest had bored him. Every battle predictable, every victory hollow. Now, for the first time in memory, he felt the thrill of uncertainty. He closed his eyes and saw again the calm human message. You have one chance to leave. Not a plea, not a curse. A condition. A contract laid before them. And he knew in that moment that the Dominion had already chosen the wrong answer. The fleet gathered at the edge of Earth's system, vast and glittering, banners of conquest unfurled. Officers boasted of the coming slaughter, eager to redeem their pride after the Admiral's troubling reports. But Crosshole stood among them like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the storm clouds gather on the horizon. He knew the sky would break. He only wondered how many would survive to see the rain. When Sarash approached one last time and asked, "Do you truly believe they can defeat us?" Crosshole did not answer at once. He turned to the viewport, to the silent blue planet gleaming against the dark, so calm, so unsuspecting. At last he spoke. "They do not need to defeat us. They only need to show us what war truly is. And when they do, we will never forget." Sarash said nothing. He bowed his head and withdrew, leaving Crosshole with the silence that had begun to haunt him. The Admiral let it settle into his bones. It was not the silence of emptiness, he realized. It was the silence before the strike, the moment the predator waits with perfect stillness. And for the first time in his long career, Crosshole knew the Dominion had finally met an enemy that would not play by their rules. The Dominion fleet descended upon Earth's orbit like a storm of steel. Dozens of capital ships, their hulls glinting with the arrogance of centuries of conquest, formed into attack formations as their crews roared with anticipation. On the flagship, Admiral Crosshole stood motionless, hands clasped tightly behind his back, eyes fixed on the serene blue sphere below. The planet betrayed no fear, no movement, no last-minute transmissions begging for mercy. It simply turned indifferent. That indifference terrified him more than any defiance could have. "Admiral," Sarash urged, his voice carrying forced confidence, "the fleet is in position. Give the order, and Earth will burn." Crosshole hesitated. The Council's decree echoed in his mind. Erase Earth, erase the myth of human defiance, but so too did the memory of that calm voice. One chance to leave. One. He had ignored the warning, but the words lingered like a blade pressed against his throat. Still, the Dominion demanded obedience, and obedience had kept him alive this long. He gave the order. The first wave of Dominion ships surged forward, weapons primed. Yet before a single shot could be fired, the void itself rippled. Space split like torn fabric, and through the rift poured black-hulled vessels, silent as tombstones, each one emerging with unnatural grace. They carried no banners, no emblems, only the cold sheen of purpose. They did not open fire immediately. They simply appeared, surrounding the Dominion fleet in a tightening noose. On Crosshole's bridge, alarms shrieked. Unknown vessels on all vectors, hundreds, no, thousands, Admiral, they've encircled us. Sarash shouted, "It's impossible. We scanned this system a dozen times." "They were here all along," Crosshole whispered. His heart hammered with a mixture of awe and dread. Hidden in silence, waiting. The human fleet moved without ceremony. With perfect synchronization, they fired. Precision strikes severed Dominion weapons arrays, sliced through engines, and disabled shields. Not one blast was wasted on destruction for its own sake. Ships were stripped of power, left adrift, their crews stunned at the swiftness. Crosshole's officers shouted conflicting orders, their voices breaking under panic, but he silenced them with a single raised claw. "Look at them," he said quietly, almost reverently. "This is not chaos. This is orchestration." He was right. The humans did not fight like the Dominion, who relied on overwhelming force and intimidation. They fought like predators who had studied their prey so thoroughly that the outcome was never in doubt. Wormholes flared across the void, disgorging more fleets behind Dominion lines, cutting off retreat. Automated drones slipped through the wreckage, hacking systems, spreading viruses that paralyzed entire cruisers. Guerrilla tactics in space, executed with machine precision. It was less a battle than a dismantling. Sarash gripped the railing, his face pale. "Admiral, we must counterattack." "With what?" Crosshole snapped. He gestured at the carnage unfolding beyond the viewport. "Every move we make, they are already 3 steps ahead. They do not counter us, they anticipate us." A Dominion destroyer finally broke rank and fired a full barrage at the nearest human ship. For a heartbeat, the Dominion officers felt relief, until the human vessel simply vanished, reappearing behind the destroyer in a burst of warped light. In seconds, the destroyer's power systems collapsed, and it drifted lifelessly into the abyss. The Dominion fleet fractured. Panic spread faster than orders could be given. Ships scattered, fleeing in every direction, only to be herded by sudden wormhole openings that spat human craft into their path. The Dominion's proud war machine, undefeated for generations, crumbled in hours. Crozel watched silently, his claws digging into the railing. He should have felt shame, rage, despair. Instead, he felt clarity. This was what he had been waiting for all these years of hollow victories. At last, an enemy who revealed the Dominion for what it truly was, fragile arrogance wrapped in steel. The comms crackled again. The same calm human voice filled the bridge. Dominion fleet, you are defeated. You may surrender now and live. Resist, and you will not. The words fell into the silence of his crew. Crozel looked at Sarash, whose lips trembled with the urge to argue, to fight, to deny. But the Admiral raised a hand. Enough. We have no fight left. Transmit our surrender. Shock rippled through the officers. Some stared at him as though he had betrayed the Dominion itself. Others sagged with relief, knowing it was the only path left. Sarash whispered broken, Admiral, what will become of us? Crozel answered without hesitation, we will live, and we will remember. The surrender was accepted without ceremony. The human fleet did not jeer, did not gloat, did not annihilate the remains of the Dominion armada. They simply ceased fire, leaving the Dominion vessels drifting, powerless but intact. That restraint unsettled Crozel more than total destruction would have. It was not mercy. It was ownership. Days later, Crozel found himself summoned, not by the Dominion Council, but by the humans. He expected execution, perhaps imprisonment, yet what awaited him was stranger. A human representative, face calm and voice steady, offered him a choice: serve as liaison, a governor within the new galactic order, or be cast aside into irrelevance. You would have me rule under your banner. Crozel asked, struggling to understand. Not rule, the human corrected. Administer. Guide your people into what comes next. You are not our enemy any longer. You are part of what we will build. Crozel bowed his head, the weight of humiliation heavy, but not unbearable. Survival had its own dignity, and he sensed the humans knew this. He accepted, not out of loyalty but necessity, and perhaps curiosity, for he wanted to see what these predators would make of the galaxy now that they had stepped from shadows. As the Dominion fleets were absorbed, as other empires bent knee to Earth's sudden ascendancy, Crozel stood once more before a viewport, staring at the planet that had undone everything he thought eternal. It was beautiful in its silence, dangerous in its calm. The Council was gone, the Dominion broken, but the galaxy remained, and it was no longer theirs to command. Sarash joined him quietly, still shaken, still bitter. We should have destroyed them when we had the chance. Crozel turned, his gaze sharp. Chance? We never had one. We mistook their stillness for weakness. We mistook their silence for fear. But silence, Sarash, was their greatest weapon. He looked back to Earth, his reflection dark against the glowing curve of oceans and continents. The humans had not wanted this war. He knew that now. But they had taken it, and in doing so, they had claimed the galaxy's future. We were warned, Crozel whispered, his voice carrying both awe and dread. And now the galaxy will never be the same. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a new order being born.